9. Shauna Bishop. Shauna Bishop was working as a Sacramento County Sheriff's deputy in 2019 when she began to get close with a colleague's teenage son. So close that the boy's parents became concerned that she was grooming him and filed a complaint against her. The 45-year-old had previously dated the young man's father and had also struck up a friendship with his mother, who was initially reluctant to believe the father's suspicions. An investigation revealed that he had every reason to be worried. He had ended the relationship after catching Bishop naked near his son. Another concerning incident happened when the boy's mother asked Bishop to help her talk to her son about some trouble he was having with marijuana and drinking. The mother wanted Bishop there because of how well the team responded to her, which at the time seemed like a good thing, but in hindsight was a glaring red flag. That night, Bishop reportedly went into the boy's room for a short time before exiting and sleeping elsewhere. The young man's sister raised the alarm after he told her that he had gotten intimate with Bishop. In a police interview, the victim said that the much older woman apologized to him the next day and said she hadn't been thinking straight because she'd taken a sleeping pill. She told him not to tell anyone about their steamy encounter. Bishop made a deal with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to 1 count of unlawful intercourse in exchange for getting several other charges dropped. She received a 1-year prison sentence and 5 years of probation, and it's safe to say that her career in law enforcement is over. 8. Wayne Pfeiffer. Wayne Pfeiffer was a part-time officer in Brewston, New York for 15 years starting in 2006 when the town's police department was first formed. For the majority of that time, he worked with 2 high-profile human trafficking groups by turning a blind eye to their activity and forewarning them of law enforcement operations in exchange for intimate favors from women who were forced into the trade. His relationship with one trafficking ring lasted from 2010 until 2018, and he was associated with another from 2017 to 2020. He was finally caught and arrested last year following an extensive investigation, which revealed damning evidence, including text messages between Pfeiffer and the drivers who brought women to him over the years. The conversations include details about what he wanted the women to look like, and even revealed that on some occasions, the illicit encounters happened at the police station during after hours. Brewster Police Chief John Delgado was shocked by the arrest. He told the Journal News that Pfeiffer seemed like a normal officer who came into work, did his job, and went home. Pfeiffer was not charged with trafficking, but faced other serious federal charges, including extortion conspiracy and using an interstate facility to promote prostitution and commit bribery. He pleaded guilty to extortion and conspiracy and admitted in court that he communicated with members of the trafficking rings and received free service from some of the women and girls who were being forced to work as prostitutes. The corrupt ex-cop faces up to 20 years in prison, although federal sentencing guidelines recommended between 37 and 46 months behind bars. Pfeiffer has agreed not to appeal any sentence of less than 51 months, which means that he's aware he's going to prison. He's due to be sentenced sometime this year. 7. Christopher Sher. Earlier this year, a police officer named Christopher Sher pulled a car over in Grand Rapids, Michigan for having an unregistered license plate. What should have been a routine traffic stop turned deadly when a struggle broke out between Sher and the driver, a 26-year-old immigrant from the Democratic Republic of Congo named Patrick Laloya. Disturbing body cam footage shows Sher forcing Laloya to the ground after he tried to run away, while yelling "Stop resisting, let go, and drop the taser." Just moments later, the officer fatally shot the suspect in the back of the head. Even though Laloya didn't cooperate with the police, he was on his hands and knees, facing away from Sher when the deadly bullet was fired. In other words, he appeared to be in a pretty helpless and subdued position, rather than posing an imminent danger that would justify an officer's decision to shoot. Sher was initially put on paid leave, but was ultimately fired and charged with second-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty and could face a life sentence if convicted. 6. Brian Broome. In July of 2021, a Palm Beach Gardens, Florida police officer named Brian Broome ran into a woman he hadn't seen in 20 years at a funeral. They reconnected and dated for a little over a month before the woman ended the relationship due to what would later be described as toxic behavior. She would later report Broome to law enforcement in a state of terror, claiming that he had aggressively stalked her and told her that if she ever left him, he'd hunt her down and kill her. The victim, who's physically disabled, further alleged that Broome was monitoring her home using a surveillance system that she gave him emergency access to. He asked about packages she received and visitors who stopped by, and also made numerous threatening phone calls to her. When the woman attempted to ignore Broome or didn't respond to his calls or text messages fast enough, he deliberately set off the alarm. She revoked his access to the system, only to receive a phone call from the security company days later saying that there had been numerous attempts to gain entry into her home. A search warrant revealed photos on Brome's phone of the interior of his victim's home, along with evidence that he'd masked his phone number using a burner app and called the woman pretending to be a salesperson from a website she frequently uses. She reportedly blocked any numbers that she suspected belonged to Broome and told him to stop contacting her, but he just wouldn't listen. When he found out he was facing an aggravated stalking charge along with 4 counts of cyberstalking, he allegedly tried to weasel his way out of trouble by telling detectives that he persisted because he was concerned about the woman's health. But Brome's history spoke for itself when investigators found a concerning history of him exhibiting similar behaviors towards other women. He's currently on administrative leave without pay pending the case's outcome and is free on bond. Speaking with local station WPBF, the accuser said that she's confident that the case is being taken seriously and urged anyone else who's been victimized by him to come forward. This suggests he could perhaps face even more charges, depending on what the investigation finds. 5. Javier Marquez. A 27-year-old Miami-Dade police officer named Javier Marquez recently became one of the latest perpetrators to make news headlines for allegedly using an Apple AirTag to carry out a stalking campaign. The small tracking devices were designed to help people find important lost or missing items, but they've appeared in several news stories about people misusing them with sinister intentions. Marquez is accused of planting an AirTag in his ex-girlfriend's car immediately after they broke up earlier this year, and then taunting her with text messages about knowing where she is or actually showing up at the location. The woman figured out how he was keeping such close tabs on her when she heard one of the AirTags making a faint beeping noise. According to an arrest report, he eventually admitted in a text message that he was behind the disturbing act. Marquez was let go from the police department and charged with stalking and installing tracking devices. He had been employed as a cop for less than a year when his career in law enforcement came to a screeching halt. 4. John Philip Barkley. In October of 2021, a student at Mitchell Community College in Statesville, North Carolina, noticed that a man was following her to and from her classes. He also allegedly followed her to her car, where he yelled at her and struck the vehicle's window. The harassing behavior only escalated from there until the victim decided things had gone too far and officially filed a complaint on campus. An arrest report accused a 59-year-old ground supervisor named John Philip Barkley of stalking the woman at a gazebo where she liked to study, grabbing her and trying to force his tongue into her mouth, and other disturbing behaviors. He was charged with indecent liberties for the unwanted advances toward the student, as well as sexual assault, battery, and 3 misdemeanor accounts of stalking. News of the arrest came as a shock to many students who were used to seeing Barkley on campus and were totally unaware that someone had become fearful of him. A Mitchell Community College spokesperson said that he'd been working there for a decade and that he'd been placed on administrative leave when the complaint was filed. There appears to be no update since the case first made headlines, so it's unclear where the situation currently stands. 3. Thomas Diorio and Michael Sardone. In April 2021, a woman claiming to be an escort asked NYPD officers Thomas Diorio and Michael Sardone to drive her and some other working girls from Queens to a hotel in Manhattan to see a client. She said that their usual driver was unavailable and offered the cops a tempting amount of money for the favor, pointing out that they were high-end workers and not just your typical streetwalkers. The men obliged and were paid $2,000 upfront for the job. They waited in the car for the women to finish with their appointment before driving them back to Queens, at which point they received another $2,000. Diorio and Sardone gave rides to the women on 2 other occasions. In one instance, one of the women said that she was about to meet with a new client and asked the pair to be prepared to enter the hotel room if something went wrong. They agreed and ended up going to the room when she claimed that her customer was refusing to pay her the full amount for her services. Little did Diorio and Sardone know the women they gave rides to were actually undercover cops, and so was the client they accused of underpaying them. The men fell under internal scrutiny as part of what court documents describe as an extended integrity test, and they both failed miserably. Diorio was fired and Sardone hastily retired once he realized they were under suspicion. An investigation found that the men had profited from prostitution, failed to perform their duties as police officers, and committed other misconduct, including seeing what appeared to be cocaine in one of the women's possession and doing nothing about it. 2. Christopher Bullies. 47-year-old Christopher Bullies was among several police officers who responded to a call in Sunrise, Florida last year about a disturbance at a convenience store. The suspect, who was accused of battering several people, allegedly resisted officers as they put him into the back of a squad car. Body cam footage later revealed that once the suspect was in the vehicle, Bullies, who was working as a sergeant at the time, approached and got into a heated verbal altercation with the man. As the situation continued to escalate, a concerned female officer grabbed Bullies' belt and pulled him away from the car. Bullies then turned around, grabbed the officer by the neck and pushed her backwards. He walked back to the vehicle where the suspect was being detained, slammed the door shut, then pointed at the officer who had intervened and offered some choice words. The incident happened in late 2021, but the footage wasn't brought to anyone's attention until a few months later. Bullies, who was placed on administrative leave while his superiors investigated, was recently charged with assaulting an officer and tampering with evidence. In a statement, the Broward County Sheriff's Office said that the disgraced former cop is accused of intentionally touching or striking the female police officer against her will, assaulting her by holding pepper spray up to her face, and assaulting the civilian male by holding pepper spray to his face. If convicted of the most serious offense, felony battery on a law enforcement officer, Bullies could face a 5-year prison sentence. He could also receive a 1-year sentence for assaulting an officer and 60 days for assaulting a civilian. 1. Operation Fox Hunt. In a disturbing attempt to persuade immigrants to return to China, a group of at least 9 people worked together to harass, threaten, and intimidate their targets into leaving the US. Dubbed Operation Fox Hunt, the coordinated stalking campaign involved threatening to hurt one's family if he didn't return to China, where he's reportedly wanted on bribery charges. Federal authorities began arresting suspects in 2020. 9 were indicted last year, including a Chinese prosecutor named Tu Lan, who's accused of traveling to the US specifically to participate in the abusive plot and to destroy evidence. The case also involves a former NYPD detective sergeant, Michael McCahan, who allegedly gathered intelligence on 2 of the targets after the group's previous attempts to get them to return to China failed. McMahon was a cop-turned-private investigator at the time, and his lawyer is arguing that he had no idea he was acting on behalf of the Chinese government when he took on the work. His police record contains no indicators that he would knowingly participate in a malicious stalking effort, but as they say, you can never be 100% sure of someone's true colors. Whether McMahon was an innocent and unsuspecting accomplice or a deliberate co-conspirator remains to be seen as the case unfolds in court.
Number 10. Jennifer William Frangie. When Jennifer William Frangie saw a dog sitting in a car in a Massachusetts parking lot on a hot day, she was mortified. She waited to see if the animal's owner would return. The windows were lowered just a few inches, and she was concerned about the pet's safety due to the extraordinarily hot temperatures that day. After keeping an eye on the pup for 40 minutes, William Frangie decided that she had waited for long enough. She opened the car door to give the dog some relief and stayed with the canine until its guardian returned to the vehicle with her husband and child. The pet's owner was less than thankful for the woman's kind and concerned actions and was quite angry at William Frangie for opening her car without permission. A loud fight erupted between the 2 women, while the dog's owner and her partner argued that the animal was only soaking wet because he had gone swimming that day, not from the hot and humid conditions he was suffering in. The couple also blamed William Frangie's intervention as the reason the visibly distressed dog was shaking. Viral footage of the bizarre interaction shows both women threatening to call the police on each other before the altercation eventually diffuses. In the end, both parties voluntarily went separate ways without any officers present. Number 9. Brandon Zioski. In October 2020, 39-year-old Brandon Zioski found an injured bird along the national seashore in Provincetown, Massachusetts. He wrapped the animal in a sweatshirt and drove until he saw a police car sitting outside a local pharmacy. The good civilian approached Officer Thomas Radzik and asked if he'd summon animal control to the scene to help. Radzik followed Zioski to his vehicle to see the wounded bird, but a 12-gauge shotgun caught the officer's eye first. He asked Zioski to show his license to carry, but Zioski said he had left it at home and didn't have it on him at the time. When Radzik ran the man's name through the state's database, he learned that the license had expired almost a year earlier, which meant that he was illegally in possession of a gun and ammunition. Zioski's father had the proper license, so he took the firearm and ammo. In the meantime, police charged Zioski with improper storing of a firearm and possession of ammunition without a firearms identification card, which are misdemeanors, and carrying a firearm without a license, which is a felony. The injured bird was taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center, but its condition deteriorated and veterinarians were forced to euthanize it. It's unclear how Zioski's case turned out, but hopefully he was able to put the incident behind him without any lasting consequences, especially since he had the best of intentions when he got in trouble. Number 8. Laura Morand. Laura Morand was working as a public school teacher in Cincinnati, Ohio, when she felt sympathetic toward a student who came from a troubled background and took him in. His father had died tragically, and Morand eventually gained custody of the child. By the time he turned 19 last year, he only lived with her occasionally, and he had started to get into some trouble with drugs. One day in late 2021, police carried out a search warrant on Morand's house. They found over 30 grams of either heroin, fentanyl, or a combination of the two drugs. Prosecutor David Woods said that the illicit stash was in plain view when the officers went inside the home. Morand was taken into custody on suspicion of drug trafficking and was put on paid leave from her job the next day. Her defense attorney, Mark Crombine, contended that the drugs belonged to the young man she had taken in out of the kindness of her heart, and that this is truly an example of how no good deed goes unpunished. He further explained that the officers executing the search warrant described Morand as the most clueless person that they'd ever met, if what she was saying about not knowing anything about the drugs is true. At his client's bond hearing, Crombine described the statement as a compliment and clarified that Morand isn't and has never been into drugs and doesn't have knowledge of those types of things. A judge released the school teacher on her own recognizance. It's unclear whether the mix-up over who was responsible for the drugs has been sorted out or where the case currently stands. Number 7. Keith Hagood. Keith Hagood was waiting at New York City's Grand Central Terminal recently to catch a subway home from work when he saw a woman being verbally assaulted. He later told local station KRDO that a man had approached the victim and was yelling and waving his arms in her face as if he was about to hit her. Concerned for the woman's well-being, Hagood intervened by physically putting himself between her and the man who was verbally assaulting her. He dialed 911, and while he spoke to dispatchers, the man physically attacked him. The next thing Hagood remembered was being in an ambulance, according to KRDO. He ended up hospitalized with numerous injuries, including a cranial brain bleed, multiple head lacerations, a broken jaw, and numerous orbital bone fractures. Hagood's sister, Mielana Butt, received a phone call several hours after the assault and learned that her brother's attacker had pushed him to the ground and kicked him in the head repeatedly. The NYPD quickly apprehended the culprit, who had a lengthy rap sheet that includes at least one prior arrest for assault. Speaking from his hospital bed, Hagood said that he's a lifelong New Yorker and that he doesn't like what's been going on there. He was most likely referencing the alarming uptick in violent crime throughout the Big Apple, which reached its highest levels in decades earlier this year and is especially problematic within the city's transit system. Number 6. Juan Cristalinas. Domino's delivery driver Juan Cristalinas was dropping off an order in Los Angeles recently when he saw an elderly man being assaulted and tried to intervene. Both the 49-year-old delivery man and the 76-year-old assault victim were shot. Police found them lying in the street with gunshot wounds. Cristalinas was rushed to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead from his injuries. The senior citizen that he sprang into action to help survived. The woman who had placed the Domino's order, Sally Gomez Cox, told ABC News that she was waiting for her food when she heard what sounded like fireworks going off. In a heartfelt message to supporters of a crowdfunding campaign to help pay for Cristalinas' funeral expenses, his daughter-in-law Daniela Travilla said that he was trying to do the right thing and paid a very high price for it. She further revealed that her husband's father worked 2 jobs, working as a mechanic in the evenings to supplement his pizza delivery income. He had a wife, 3 kids, and 3 grandkids that he helped support with his earnings. Travilla further described her father-in-law as the kind of person who always stood up for others and wasn't scared of doing the right thing. She wrote that the family was proud of Cristalinas' final act of bravery and kindness, but that they were all devastated by the loss. Speaking with ABC News, the man's son, Ivan, described his father as a tough-looking man who had the biggest heart. Unfortunately, the suspects are still at large. Number 5. Robert Maro. While driving in heavy traffic along Interstate 85 in Gwinnett County, Georgia recently, Robert Maro noticed a truck ahead of him that had a loose tie-down strap dragging on the road. He pulled up near the pickup to try alerting the driver, who took the concerned civilian's approach the wrong way. Speaking with WSB-TV, Maro said that the man moved his truck so close to Maro's that their side view mirrors touched, leaving a dark streak along the Good Samaritan's truck. Maro continued driving ahead of the driver he had tried to warn for several miles before pulling off at an exit, at which point he heard the unmistakable sound of a bullet striking the side of his vehicle. He later said that when he looked over, the man in the truck was holding a gun and it was still pointed in Maro's direction. The driver then rolled up his window and drove away. Police found shell casings at the scene. They identified the alleged shooter as Demetrius Nimmons and found his truck and trailer parked behind a gas station a little while later. The suspect was charged with aggravated assault. Summarizing his thoughts in a local news interview, Maro said, "I'd been upset in traffic, but never so upset I would want to do that to someone." Number 4. Reuben Ruiz. Earlier this year, the Texas town of Uvalde was struck by unspeakable tragedy when a crazed gunman entered an elementary school and shot 2 teachers and 19 students dead. Months later, details of the disturbing shooting are still being revealed, but the police response has fallen under widespread scrutiny. Many believe that if responding officers had taken action sooner, lives would have been saved. One cop who quickly fell under harsh criticism was Officer Reuben Ruiz, the now widowed husband of Eva Morales, who was one of the 2 teachers murdered that day. He was one of the first officers to arrive at the scene. Members of the public were outraged to see video footage that appeared to show Ruiz nonchalantly checking his cell phone during the massacre. But there are multiple sides to every story, and some have come to the disgraced policeman's defense. Texas State Representative Joe Moody accused the public of being too quick to pass judgment on a man who, in his words, has lost everything. He further insinuated that people had misjudged the video's context and incorrectly painted Ruiz out as malicious or indifferent. And, as it turns out, Quite the opposite might be true. In a recent Texas Senate hearing, the state's Department of Public Safety Director Steve McCraw said that Ruiz had tried to go into his wife's classroom after hearing gunshots, but that he was stopped and detained by other members of law enforcement, who took his gun and removed him from the scene. The hours-long gut-wrenching testimony described how Ruiz was one of several officers who attempted to take action against the shooter, but were stopped by an on-scene commander who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children. More details are likely to be revealed as the controversy unfolds, but it's become clear that the reality of what happened may be different from how it seems, even if there were undeniable flaws in how the situation was handled. Number 3. Stuart Jeffrey. Toronto-based TikToker Stuart Jeffrey was out and about one day last year when he decided to pay it forward and bought fast food for a homeless man. In a viral post recounting the interaction, Jeffrey explained that he was about to walk into McDonald's to buy a coffee when a man asked him if he could spare some change. He said that he didn't have any change, but that he could buy the man some food if he wanted. The panhandler asked for a coffee and a Big Mac, which Jeffrey gladly went inside and got for him. In his video about the event, Jeffrey said that when he handed the man his order and told him to have a nice day, he responded by saying, "A word of advice, I'd lay off the McDonald's." Instead of being offended by the remark, Jeffrey laughed incredulously, stating to his followers, "The worst part was, I was fat-shamed for doing a good deed." It's a good thing that he decided to reflect on the situation with humor rather than be offended. Several commenters were able to relate to the influencer's experience, including a woman who gave a homeless person some food while she was extremely pregnant, only for the man to tell her she walked like a horse. Another social media user named Lauren Ash discussed a time when she gave $20 to a homeless person, who responded by saying, "Don't worry, not all men like skinny women." Number 2. Mom to the rescue. A 28-year-old mom and her 2 kids were spending the day at the beach in Brigantine, New Jersey recently when she noticed that the children had been overpowered by a large wave. She rushed into the ocean to rescue them when she, too, became overwhelmed by the powerful Atlantic current. There were no lifeguards on duty at the time, but luckily they were doing a training exercise nearby. A beachgoer ran over to them and let them know that a swimmer needed help. By the time the lifeguards got to the scene, one child had been rescued, but the woman and her other child were still in the water. Luckily, both kids were okay and were later reunited with family, but the mom was unresponsive when she was taken to shore. Emergency responders immediately performed CPR, and she was taken to a hospital in critical condition. Brigantine Beach Patrol Chief Kip Emick told local station WPVI that a powerful nor'easter that happened back in May had left numerous underwater hazards, including some deep gullies right off the shore. He pointed out that this is one reason why it's important for people to avoid swimming when there are no lifeguards on duty. While a mom can only be expected to run into a dangerous situation to save her kids, the woman's selfless actions are no less commendable than if a complete stranger had intervened. Hopefully she'll survive and go on to make a full recovery. Number 1. Bison Brawl. Officials at Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming recently announced that a 34-year-old park goer was gored by a bull bison near the famous Old Faithful geyser. The man and his family, who were visiting from Colorado Springs, were walking on a boardwalk when the animal charged at him and gored him with his horns. Family members remained at the scene while the bull continued to rush at the man, who received an injury to his arm and was taken to a local hospital in an ambulance. Footage of the alarming encounter shows the victim approaching 3 people who were standing too close to the bison, who was acting visibly aggressive. Although an investigation into the incident is ongoing and the circumstances surrounding the attack are unclear, the video suggests that the man may have been trying to warn the group that they needed to give the animal some space. Park officials reminded the public that it can be extremely dangerous to approach wildlife at Yellowstone. They cautioned visitors to stay at least 75 feet 23 meters away from bison, elk, bighorn sheep, deer, moose, and coyotes, and to keep a distance of at least 300 feet, 91 meters, from bears and wolves. Local station KKTV reported that this was the second bison attack on a human in the park this year, adding that bison are unpredictable and can run 3 times faster than people.
10. Pranking 911. In early 2020, a 17-year-old in Spring, Texas, pranked the police and reported a fake robbery in progress because he wanted to see his friend get harassed, arrested, and possibly even beat up by the police. According to the teenager, it was all just a joke, but that wasn't the way it played out, and it definitely didn't seem like a joke to the cops who showed up to investigate. The prank robbery report came in around 4:40 p.m. on a Monday at the Easy Stop food store. The 17-year-old didn't even call the police. He actually texted 911 to let them know there were 2 men currently robbing the store with their guns drawn. Deputies arrived quickly, immediately realized there was no robbery taking place, and felt pretty upset over the whole ordeal. They interviewed people at the store and in the general area, and nobody knew anything about a robbery. What the teenager didn't realize was that the police could figure out who he was since he had stupidly texted them off his own phone. He was charged with giving a false report, all because the teen said he wanted his friend, who had been on the scene at the time of the text, to get jacked up by the police. 9. The Beauty Queen and the Explosive. Kendra Gill was once a Utah beauty queen, but in 2013 she grudgingly accepted a plea deal after she was accused of throwing homemade bombs from a moving car in a suburb of Salt Lake City. Kendra and the other 18-year-old she was with pleaded guilty to attempted possession of a chemical device. However, Kendra had her charges dismissed after completing 200 hours of community service. She also had to pay a fine of $500, but managed to wiggle her way out of the situation without any felony charges or real criminal repercussions. It all started when Kendra and 3 of her friends learned how to make bombs using toilet bowl cleaner and aluminum foil. These aren't big bombs that will blow up a house, but they do go boom and make a small explosion. The solution was mixed into plastic bottles and thrown out the window of the moving car. The teenagers claimed it was a harmless prank because nobody got injured. But if one of those toilet bombs had hit someone or landed on a dog, it could have been much worse. In the end, the case was fast-tracked because none of the teenagers had a criminal history, and they seemed to mostly be upstanding citizens. Kendra herself had recently competed in beauty contests and won a scholarship of $2,000, only weeks later to be charged with manufacturing homemade bombs. 8. Too much CocaCola. A YouTuber by the name of King Sid, a guy with at least 200,000 subscribers, was recently arrested after he and a couple of pals misused the 911 emergency service in January of 2022 as part of a YouTube prank. In the video, the YouTuber King Sid, real name Jason Sid, instructed his friends to call the cops and report weird and suspicious activity at a gas station in Florida. The weird and suspicious activity was actually just King Sid baiting the cops to his car. When the police showed up and asked what was going on, the YouTuber and his friends said that they had something in the trunk. This prompted another van full of cops to show up, and everyone was told to step out of the car. Then, when the police searched the vehicle, they discovered a trunk full of CocaCola, not guns or cocaine, or a body like they may have been expecting. The YouTuber was allowed to leave the scene, but later arrested after the cops realized they had been the butt of a joke. According to Clyde Perry with the Coral Springs Police Department, he was personally offended by the prank and how it wasted precious time and resources. He said the YouTuber did it to try and show how overtly aggressive police officers are when they respond to calls, which they weren't in this incident. And in the end, he got a slap on the wrist, while his video accumulated hundreds of thousands of views. 7. Inappropriate candy. In 2017, a man in Chicago sent a large chocolate candy bar to the McLennan County Sheriff's Office, hoping to get a laugh. More specifically, he sent a candy bar to an employee named Tracy Chance, and that candy bar was shaped like a giant and gratuitous male body part. His name is Thomas Gourneau, and he said the novelty item was sent to Tracy as a prank. It was just supposed to be a gag, something to lighten the mood and get some laughs at the police station. Instead, the cops took major offense and turned it into a criminal case. Now, in case you were wondering, these people weren't strangers. They actually knew each other. Thomas used to date Tracy's ex-wife, and the two men had always been in a less than friendly relationship. They sent each other unsettling emails and had a healthy rivalry. But apparently the chocolate candy bar shaped like a phallus was the last straw and boiled the bad blood already between the two men. Following Thomas's arrest, the case got dragged through the court system for 2 years. Then, just as the pretrial hearing was coming up, the district attorney's office decided they would dismiss the charges because the case was too ridiculous. Even though Tracy complained that Thomas had harassed, annoyed, abused, and tormented him, the district attorney could clearly see it was all just a prank that one party took a little too seriously. 6. Not knowing how to swim. A woman received 1 year in prison following a prank gone wrong on a boat. In 2021, Shontover Kirkland from Georgia caused the deaths of 2 men completely by accident, and yet also very much on purpose. The 32-year-old pleaded guilty to reckless conduct and involuntary manslaughter, and now she's going to be doing 12 months behind bars. It all happened in Lincoln County on Clarks Hill Lake. Kirkland rented a pair of boats for a birthday celebration. She and a bunch of friends took the boats out for a day on the lake, expecting to have an awesome time. But Ian Wilson and Edward Kirk ended up losing their lives. Shontover Kirkland didn't know that Edward Kirk had no idea how to swim. As part of a prank, she shoved him off the boat and into the lake. He began flailing wildly, clearly in serious distress, and that was when Ian Wilson jumped in to try and save him. However, Wilson appeared to be just as poor of a swimmer, and both men vanished underneath the water and weren't seen again that day. Their bodies weren't discovered until a week later. Technically, Shontover Kirkland committed accidental murder. She had only been trying to tease her friend, whom she had known since she was only 14 years old. They had been friends their whole lives, and she had no ill will for him at all. She had just been messing around. But that poorly thought-out prank sent her lifelong friend into the cold and deadly waters of the lake. Shontover's guilt will likely stay with her forever. 5. Water gun prank gone wrong. On June 2nd, 2022, Ethan Fleming was beaten to death in response to a prank involving a water gun. Ethan was only 17 years old at the time and hadn't intended to hurt anyone. He pulled out a water blaster and started shooting water at a group of older guys playing basketball. They didn't appreciate the joke, and they came out from the basketball court and beat Ethan until he stopped breathing. According to the Akron police, Deshaun Stanford, Tyler Stanford, and Donovan Jones were all arrested on June 11th in response to the murder. Police Chief Stephen Myatt said Ethan lost his life in a senseless act of violence and in no way deserved what happened to him that night. All he had done was shoot water at some strangers playing basketball, and they had overreacted and committed homicide. Ethan had dreams of being a lawyer, had a bright future ahead of him, and now he's gone, and a scholarship is being set up in his name through Akron Public Schools. 4. Swapping schools. A couple of students in Alabama thought it would be hilarious if they pulled a prank by switching schools. The students described it as a harmless senior prank. A small group from Chilton County High School and a small group from Jemison High School showed up at one another's schools, walked into each other's classes, and expected that the teachers would catch them in the act. But they weren't caught right away, and both groups of students managed to spend almost the entire day hanging out at opposite schools with nobody the wiser. Alas, the teachers did eventually figure it out, and the repercussions were extreme. The teenagers were threatened with going to jail. They had their scholarships revoked, and all they had wanted to do was have a bit of fun before graduation. When the teachers realized what had happened, they stole the kids' phones, towed their cars out of the parking lots, banned them from the school premises for a year, and even suspended them from their own schools. Those who were on sports teams were kicked off the teams, and the seniors were forbidden from attending prom. It ended as a total disaster for the kids, whose futures may have just been ruined because they thought it would be funny to attend a different school for a day. According to the local parents, the school lashed out at the kids because they exposed how horrible the security is, since a bunch of strangers were able to loiter in the school for almost an entire day. 3. Expired eggs and gunshots. On October 20th, 2021, Rachel Olivia Buchanan was shot and killed. It was a heart-wrenching accident caused by a prank gone horribly wrong. It all went down in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Rachel, who's only 19, was shot outside the city limits by a pair of men, one who happened to be her boyfriend. According to local DA Andrew Murray, Rachel and her boyfriend had been hanging out with another couple at one of their houses. They realized that they had forgotten their charger, and so the two men left together to go down the street and pick up a charger at the other couple's house. It was just a quick trip so that they could all charge their phones. But because there was a rumor of a Black Panther living in the area and prowling about at night, the two men brought guns with them. They were afraid they might be attacked by the Panther, since there had been so many recent sightings. When the men left to get the charger, the two women decided they would play a prank on them by hiding outside the house and throwing expired eggs when they returned. The women positioned themselves down an embankment in the dark, ready to throw stinky eggs. But then they started giggling when the men got close, and the men thought they heard a growling panther. Then they heard a stick break. They saw a dark figure in the ditch, and both men pulled out their guns and started shooting. Before anyone really knew what happened, Rachel Buchanan had taken 3 bullets and lay dead in the ditch. 2. Messing around gone wrong. 20-year-old Charlie Gadd, a student at the University of Essex, was last seen alive on December 11, 2021. Charlie had gone out with his parents for a family night in the English city of Manchester. They went to the Warehouse Project, a popular area for visitors, and had a great time. Charlie was last seen on surveillance footage standing outside the Royal Exchange Theatre and moving toward St. Anne Street. You see, Charlie wanted to mess around with his parents and pull a prank on them by running off into the night. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning when Charlie slipped away, thinking it would be a hilarious gag. But when he didn't show up by 11 o'clock in the morning, 10 hours later, his family reported him missing to the police. The case is still not totally solved, and nobody really knows what happened. Charlie was an adult who should have been able to find his way back to the hotel in Manchester, even though he wasn't familiar with the city. And yet somehow he must have gotten turned around and then died. His body was found 1 month later on January 10th, dumped in the Manchester Ship Canal. No one has any idea how he got there, if he was killed, or what went on in the hours after he tried to pull the prank. 1 second he was there, and a month later he was found in a canal. 1. The Target Challenge. Charlotte Fisher and Johnson LaRose, known as Saucy and Honey on YouTube, were arrested and charged with third-degree criminal trespassing after they stayed overnight at a Pennsylvania Target on February 21, 2022. They did it for their YouTube channel as something called the Target Challenge. This is where people attempt to stay 24 hours in a Target shopping center, sleeping in the store overnight, and filming it all to upload online. Everything started out okay until the alarm went off. The police arrived to check for any burglars, didn't find anything unusual, and so they left. But the next day, employees at the store looked over their security footage and learned exactly what had happened. The YouTubers had hidden themselves inside cardboard boxes before the employees left the store for the night, and then just kind of wandered around the Target for the rest of the time with flashlights. They didn't steal anything, although they did build a box fort and take a brief nap. Charlotte and Johnson were planning on spending the whole night in the store, but gave up and snuck out a back door at about 3 o'clock in the morning. This was what set off the alarms and brought the police. But then they foolishly returned at 8 o'clock in the morning to film another segment for their video. The pair were arrested and charged, and now they're looking at up to 7 years in prison for their little prank. Although, to be fair, they did go from about 17,000 subscribers to 20,000 subscribers after the video. Would you rather be stuck in a Target for 24 hours or a Waffle House? Let us know which would be worse in the comments. And thanks for watching. Remember to hit subscribe and come back soon. Bye.